Hello, everyone, to the latest and overdue episode of Leaders Talk. I've been kind of focused on my own stuff, so I apologize for the delay on this new season, I suppose. Mr. Elsawy Yehia, I met you, to everyone who doesn't know, I met him when I had a vacancy in Saudi, in Riyadh, and it was a chief product officer role. And he was one of those few people that when you're interviewing them, and excuse me, so every now and then I'm going to look off to the distance just to get my thoughts in order. But trust me, I'm with you. So, and if you have any questions at any point, feel free to comment, and we will make sure that we can try to answer every single question as fast as possible. So, as I was saying, is I met Mr. Elsawy during my interview process and hiring process for a chief product officer role in Riyadh. Of course, he's live with us from Canada. So that was going to be a big relocation project for him and his family. But while I was interviewing him, it didn't feel so much of an interview as it did more of just two friends talking as if I've known him all my life, but it was really just the first time I've ever met him. But he blew my mind in the sense that it's very rare that you come across someone who is a C-suite and still yet so passionate about the technical parts of their work. But even beyond that, when I asked him about leadership questions, you're going to be a chief, a C-suite person in the company, and you got to ask these leadership questions about how are you going to deal with other C-suite people? How are you going to deal with your team? How do you manage conflicts? How do you think about things strategically? What's the process flow in terms of coordinating strategy across the company? And while we were talking about that, he really had a lot of insights. And for me, I've done leadership coaching before, but I didn't have these insights on how to be a leader on a C-suite level. And that's one reason I love doing executive search, is because when you meet these people, you really are fascinated and you're really curious to ask a lot more questions beyond the scope of your listed standard questions. And I kind of just let Elsawy in the interview just go off and I was just sitting baffled and like taking notes for my own personal development. And I'm really grateful, Mr. Elsawy, to have you with us today. I imagine that anyone else that's really a fan of product development and people and leadership that's attending now would also be grateful for this Leaders Talk episode. But yeah, you've also written a new book, which I've been waiting for quite some time. I'm looking forward to reading it. I'm still waiting for my signed copy.
Work on
But
that.
you've also been a C-suite person. You've been a public speaker. You've done keynote speeches. You've got an award from actually a bank in Canada for speaking as well. And I would like, just if you don't mind talking about the manifesto and the book and anything else you'd like to talk about.
All right. Well, that was a lot. Thank you. It was a very humbling introduction. So thank you so much for that, and I'm very grateful to be on, and I'm looking forward to this discussion. So a couple of things, and I mean, I can go in different directions here, but maybe a bit on the manifesto. So just speaking of the manifesto, and I know this word manifesto kind of has different meanings for different people, but it's really was the starting point for me personally, as part of the work that I do on Prevail, which is my startup that I can talk about a little bit more later, to really put down our principles, our beliefs, our intentions, and our values on how do we make decisions objectively. And that's how we created this human-centric manifesto. And we basically named it Empowering the People. And the manifesto's goal is to help courageous, creative, compassionate change makers, all starting with C, making it easier to remember, to make better decisions and to help you articulate your values on how do you make these decisions, I think is critical for any organization. So that's a little bit on the manifesto, and we can kind of go through the principles. On the book, published a book, I think it was mid-March, March 15th of this year. It was definitely a big step for me because I had this as a project for a really long time. And I was just sitting in a coffee shop last year thinking, I'm going to do it. Let's go through the process. Thanks to a lot of support from my colleagues and other people that I worked with in the past in my network. Received a lot of guidance and support in the process. And of course, my wife and kids for being patient, publishing it. But the book's name is Product People, a journal of laughter and tears. And I think the main premise, if you look, it's set up, and I say that at the beginning of the book, but it's basically set up like a buffet of sorts where you can um, go to any part of the book. It's quite modular, and read any post on a different topic, depending on what you are interested in. And the whole idea was for me to combine all my thoughts about product, about design, about leadership, and give a bit of a perspective, but do it in a way that is wouldn't call it satire per se, but it's a bit of applying humor and laughing at yourself to better understand yourself in a way. Nutshell about the book and the manifesto.
It's kind of I think when you're designing a product, it's really important to detach yourself emotionally, but also to be very self-aware. And I think that people really get emotionally invested in their designs and their process, and it kind of takes away from the ability to actually sell on a mass scale.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, you're the expert.
It's a common problem. I mean, you hear about this even from the early days of design thinking, and I'm going to use quotes because that's another loaded term. But the idea of being seduced by the problem, or being seduced by an idea rather than a problem. So it's like you fall in love with a certain idea. You kind of love as some might say blind, and you're completely ingrained in it that you don't see anything else. So I think it is a common theme that you see within product, within design, especially for people that maybe cannot reframe their own biases and disconnect and objectively look at something. So I think it definitely exists, what you mentioned.
So, I mean, I have a follow-up question, but before I do, guys, if you have questions, please comment and we'll get back to you on this session live. We will answer you immediately. Don't hesitate, ask questions if, anyone's even watching right now, but of course, you can ask questions at any point. Yehia is tagged on the event, so he can always respond in the comment later on. But if you have a question right now, ask. For example, one question I have is that I'm sure most people get really confused on what product design is and product development. So, there's a big difference between product development, for example, SaaS industry versus FMCG consumer goods, and I think a lot of people get really confused on the difference, and maybe you can enlighten us on what that difference is.
Yeah, I mean, look, the controversy is if you look at these fields. Okay, so you take the word design, very loaded word, different meaning for different people. And I think what people fall into the trap of trying to come up with a universal definition and then imposing it on others and saying, yeah, this is what is deemed to be design. It's a very subjective term. I myself went with a approach to say, what are the dimensions that you can define this term with and sense make around the word design? But you'll find, whether it's LinkedIn, you'll find it on forums, in books, where people describe what design is in a very different way. There's the product designer versus UX designer saga or controversy. There's the UX writer versus content designer. And the difference between them. There's the product manager, to your point about product manager versus product owner. And I find that with maturity, you get to understand that it's not necessarily about being correct and saying that this is the universal definition everybody shall follow and having these debates around it, but it's more about being aligned on what do you mean when you say product design or when you say product management, etc. So I'll give you mine, but I needed to put that caveat out there to make sure that I don't fall into the same trap of trying to create this universal definition to hold people to it without necessarily providing the context on the meaning. There's a good, I guess, parallel to this around alignment of meaning, where at least in information architecture, it's commonly said that if you own a grocery store, it's better to, and you're thinking about where would you place your tomatoes as an example, you might be correct in placing your tomatoes in the fruits section, but it's true wisdom to put them in the vegetable section. And that's because it really depends on the audience and the associations that they have. So anyways, that was just something related to meaning alignment that I kind of wanted to share. So for me, thinking about design, it's really around unpacking and understanding and discovering a true human need. And I stress the word human need, and being able to not only articulate what that need is, but come up with ways, not on your own necessarily, but come up with ways and facilitate ways where you can meet that need. And technology becomes an enabler, but it's not it's not a technology trying to find a problem. It's a problem that looks for means to solve it. Where I think product management comes in, so I don't use the word development as much. I use more product management is how do you orchestrate the value delivery at scale? So what does that look like? This orchestration skill, and what you're really doing is you're orchestrating expertise on your team. So you're kind of understanding the different expertise, but you're not also a hero with a cape that comes in as a product manager that knows the solution to all problems. And I think as an industry, we suffered a lot from that comment that, or that saying that the product manager is the CEO of a product, because it set very different expectations on this idea that the product manager is the hero-like person on the team that knows it all, which I think can be further from the truth. So my brief perspective on these two terms, based on your question.
Excellent. Well, I actually love that. It actually cleared up a lot. We had an issue one time with a client, and sometimes we do payroll and we do recruitment and stuff like that. And there was a big problem that happened based on the word budget. And budget can mean anything. It's similarly ambiguous. So when you say the budget, are you talking about just the basic salary? Are you talking about this? And if it's not clearly defined from the beginning, then you can expect some extra expenses that you weren't expecting.
100%. I think that's the root of a lot of subjective conversations and debates that people have, is that we fail to define the words that we're going to use and what they mean, and we simply assume. And it gets worse the longer you stay in an organization, because you come up also with connotation and loaded meaning about some words, and you expect people that are new joiners or people that are external to the organization to have the same context, which is not the case.
Yeah,
so
and that's I think why when you go to all these multinationals, the first thing they do for the new joiners is they give them a welcome kit that includes definitions of commonly used words in the organization and their definition. And that's just to clear up stuff from day one to make sure that there's no miscommunications.
That definitely helps. Yes.
Yeah. So we actually have a very nice person here confirming that they are watching. So thank you, Haifa Yassin. I appreciate you letting us know. And of course, Osama Kamal, thanks. I assume that we cleared something up for you. So I'm happy that we could do that for you. In terms of the manifesto, you mentioned courageous vulnerability. And I think that's such a beautifully worded description. And I was wondering if you can enlighten us as well. What is courageous vulnerability?
Yeah. So actually, that's the first principle. It's courageous vulnerability, not pretentious excellence. So one of the things we try to use is basically the idea of distinction in system thinking. So when you define something, it's one thing to put a boundary around it and say what the thing is, but it helps people to define what this thing is not. So that's why we kind of took those extreme. cases on all of the values. But courageous vulnerability is the ability for someone to say, I don't know, to be vulnerable and say that I'm having a difficult day, even if you're a senior leader in an organization, to be able to share some of the problems and your struggles, whether it's you're having difficulty mentally and it's overwhelming at work, or it could be something personal, something happening at home with your family and so on. So this idea of courageous vulnerability is to have the courage to say, I don't know, I'm struggling, I'm facing this challenge, and to understand that it's okay in doing that. And I think it's very
kind of
important.
like what I did earlier with you before we
Maybe,
went live.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So I think that's key versus the I guess on the other extreme where it says pretentious excellence is the idea that I know it all. I'm infallible. I never have any problems, because that's the image that I need to project as a leader. And you get some of this fake kind of I don't want to say persona, but like this idea that, oh, I don't share that with my team. I don't share that with my with the people that I work with, because I need to project an image of this fake excellence and pretend that I've got everything under control the whole time, which is because otherwise they're going to look at me and think that, oh, this person is vulnerable. And it actually takes away from the ability to build trust, because you trust people when they actually open up, and you create an environment. If you do that as a leader, you create an environment for others to also be encouraged to say, you know what, if our leader is sharing this openly and their struggles, then it actually is an invite for me to also have the same courage to be vulnerable in some cases. So I think this value is very important, that this principle of courageous vulnerability, not pretentious excellence, in building trust, in creating a circle or a space that is safe, psychologically safe for people in an organization, but also good reminder for people that we're all human, and you don't need to you need to be yourself authentically, and you need to have the courage to do so. So that's a little bit on courageous vulnerability.
So I mean, there's a case that I want to bring up in a very careful way.
Sure.
But sometimes someone is confident and very confident, that rare moment where it's actually righteous confidence and deserved confidence, and they'll see someone doing something that could be done better, and they'll say it openly, like, let me handle it, I can do it better. And the problem is, what will happen is that people will perceive that as ego,
Mm-hmm.
and unrealistic ego, almost like delusional. And it's hard to overcome that, because that it can be done better, but no one's giving you the opportunity to do it. So how would you go about that politically, in a way where you're not going to undermine yourself as delusional, but also get the job done correctly?
Yeah, I think this is a common leadership challenge, and it kind of took me to another principle. Maybe I'll bring it into the conversation, because you spoke about egos, you spoke about being humble yet confident, and the principle is actually humble souls, not egocentric narcissists, which is kind of the other extreme. But I think there is a fine, or maybe it's not too fine, but maybe there is a fine line of being confident and being assertive when you're making certain decisions based on what you have, yet still being humble, yet still being able to communicate to people that you, and hopefully you do this in an authentic way, you don't think too much of yourself. You don't think that you're above, you're smarter than everybody else, you're better than everybody else. I personally have a corporate allergy to the other extreme. So I think there is a way to do that. And to your question, I think crafting a more beautiful question around what you're trying to say makes all the difference. Because it's one thing to say to someone, you don't know what you're doing, let me show you how it's done, versus which could be an extreme case, but versus something like, have you thought of this angle? Or what if you consider that? Or thinking about why do you think, what's the purpose behind this thing? And I think if you provide that context and you lead with questions, people kind of arrive at their own conclusions, and maybe even slightly better ways to do something because they did it their way. And what I find that is that it sticks more because it's experiential knowledge versus you giving the kind of recipe up front to say, look, I've done this before. Here's exactly what you need to do. Follow it to the teeth. And like everything is already laid out. Takes all the empowerment out of the team. And also it takes all the experiential learning out of it. So I think it's a balance of how do you allow for learning to happen and mistakes potentially, which is maybe okay, because after all, that's how people learn, but also do it in a way that is not catastrophic to your business. And you think through some of the risk that can be, mitigated as that. And I think if you frame your questions in a way and you work on being a better leader through asking better questions, you do a lot of, I think, positive impact on your team, and maybe you achieve even better results on the long run.
Wow. So I'm not going to lie, I was kind of talking about myself in that situation, and I think that I'm a lot more aggressive than I should be, and I think I need to control that kind of assertiveness. I am confident, but by no means do I think I'm the best. I know for a fact there's 1,000 people that can do 1,000 things 10 times better than I can. But there was that situation that I was saying, let me handle this, I can do it. And they're like, yeah, but I've never seen you achieve anything in it before. I'm like, given the right opportunity and the right timing, I can do it. And that conversation didn't end well for me. But I was just trying to help at the end of the day. Anyways, we have a good comment here. So Haifa, I believe it depends in which space you are leading. In corporate world, they will eat you if you admit that you're facing a challenge. Absolutely. Based on humble experience, Haifa found that she can be more real in the startup space rather than the corporate world. Oh, yeah. That's actually a big reason why I've chosen the independent path. Is because, like I just admitted, I'm very aggressive and assertive. And I don't think senior people take that too well.
I think it's definitely a great point. I think the context matters a lot. The question becomes, what are you willing to compromise, and how far are you gonna maybe change your perspective on your own values to fit in? And I think one of the worst labels that we have around cultural fit as a label, it's because there's so many, I guess, prejudice and biases that can go into a label like this. But it all comes down to a lot of insecurities that people also might have. So to the question and to your comment, it really depends on how secure and confident other people and how they feel that they're threatened by your leadership style if it's different because you go against the norm. So there's definitely some truth to that in the corporate world. I'd say, like, generalizing in general, kind of contradicting, but it's the generalization fallacy that there's always exceptions, and there's also the willingness of a leadership or of a leader as an individual to make that call to say, how far am I gonna lose my own values or compromise on my own values versus adapt to the culture that I'm operating under. It's always a challenge.
I think that in our personal lives with our close friends, we take that into consideration. The fact that people might not be, they might have some insecurities, and we take that into consideration when we word things and we confront them about things. But we forget that people are still people in professional settings, and no matter how someone senior is, or how much you look up to them, or how much you think they're your hero, I think everyone has insecurities at some level. I know that I'm facing an expansion of my family, so that's kind of creating some insecurities for me on a big level. But at the same time, I still have to keep that composure. There's this phase in sales where when you're being pressured to get results as fast as possible, it comes off as desperation to the prospects that you're trying to sell to, and it does. It's obvious, people can feel it, and they would rather walk away from it. But a misconception that those prospects have is that the people that are in that situation, that are pushy to that point, they're normally more willing to put in the work and to satisfy you, because the people that are big and big names and household names and God knows what, there's always a bigger fish in their client list, and you're not going to be their top priority ever. So it's something to consider, and to just, as well, like we were saying, is be considerate, even when it's someone from another organization coming towards you. I know it's not easy, and I know that I'm kind of currently biased on that what I just said, but it's true at the same time. So yeah, kind of went off on a tangent. You said, or written here in the manifesto, you also mentioned, I love this. I'm sorry, I'm jumping back and forth through things, if that's okay.
No problem. That's perfect.
But you said collaborative creation, not individual heroics, and that I feel like you could write a whole book just on that.
Yeah, I think that's another principle, and I think it's just a tendency that take a look at the first two words, where a lot of this comes in how do we think about control. I think it's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And typically, you'd find that a lot of people would rather do things on their own, because there's that sense of heroism. I can solve this problem. And I can do it on my own. I don't need all of these people around me to do it. So that's what I mean by individual heroics. While it gets people maybe credit on the short term, I think it harms them on the long term. And I've always been for collaborative creation, coming together to create something. While it might be slower to on the get go, because you really have to bring people aligned, to be aligned on the problem you're trying to solve. You're going to have to
the team formation stages take some time. Forming, storming, norming, conforming. I think
performing. Yes. So I think it's definitely more difficult, but it's for sure more meaningful on the long run. And I think this ability to win people's trust in this collaborative creation naturally brings in more buy-in in anything that you're doing. Because if you bring people on a journey, it's the baked pie syndrome, I call it. People want to be.
Can you repeat that? What is that?
The baked pie syndrome.
Baked pie syndrome, right? Okay.
Baked pie, yeah, baked pie. As in, if you present a baked pie to someone, they're like, "Oh, how come I wasn't part of the process?" You presented the baked pie at the end, and you said, "Here's the outcome of this work," but it's the journey that brings the investment in. Or you didn't ask me to be part of it. Mind you, in a lot of cases, people have no idea how to bake a pie, but they just want to be asked. They want to be asked at the beginning of the process to say, I want your input. I value your input. Come together, or at least be aware of how we're creating this together. Naturally, they have much more buy-in in the outcome, whether it's a project, it's a process, it's something that you're creating, than presenting this final outcome at the end and saying, we did all of this, and we came up with this solution, and here it is, you should buy into it. So collaborative creation, I don't think is just a nice thing to have, but it's also changes perspective on the amount of buy-in that you're going to get from people and the trust that you're going to build in the process, versus having the individual heroics maybe fits a Wall Street analyst or a lone wolf type approach, more so than working within product and design, and I think being a servant leader.
Well, I mean, one kind of, I guess, example that you can have here that's a really a powerful example, in my opinion, is that, there's that lone wolf, like you were saying, that it goes out to hunt, but the most they can hunt is kind of like a fish or a small rodent. But when they go out as a pack, they can bring home a deer.
Yes.
And that's that big pie that you're looking for, And I love this. I love this example of avoid individual heroics, because you're not going to be bringing home the big pie.
Oh, for sure, for sure. I can't remember who said this, but it was something around no, and it was I think it might have been Virgin, the company, and it was something around not having to deal with genius jerks. That's how they framed it, because you can have very smart people, very good at what they're doing, but nobody wants to work with them, and they don't want to collaborate with anybody. So if you're going to tolerate that at the expense of collaboration, catastrophes are going to happen. Trust is going to be ruined. Like the proverb that I started with, you're not going to go far. Might go fast, but it's going to come down crashing quite quickly.
Well, that kind of makes me think about your next kind of principle, which is, simple vocabulary, not convoluted jargon. And the reason it brings that into mind is because when you're the leader and you're trying to get your team to collaborate, we get caught up in the corporate jargon of wherever we're working. And we start to use these words, which people begin to resent these words. I'm gonna escalate this. The word escalate. How many people live right now hate the word escalate? It's like the biggest excuse not to handle a problem. But you just use that word as an excuse. I'm going to escalate this to my boss. Why not? Or to your boss, which is even like kind of a threat. But when you're wording things carefully and clearly and concisely and building a process that's easy to follow for everyone and follow up on, then that's when you start to see that team spirit. And I hope I didn't just kind of like give it away, but like, if you don't mind.
No, I think you touched on great things. I mean, simple vocabulary wins every time. In fact, like in storytelling, there's this idea of a transparent vocabulary, where someone reads something or consumes a story, and it could be even a meeting or a conversation that you're having. They're not thinking about the words that you're using, because it's so transparent that they're not thinking, oh, what does that word mean anymore? Because now you took them away from the subject matter, and now you're making them wonder. And in a way, you're making them think like, am I not too smart to understand like what this thing is? And that's where their mind is going. So they're talking, one of the things that I do, at least in written communication, is that I put it against a reader meter, which tells you the level of vocabulary. And typically you want to write at a less than a fifth grader level of vocabulary. And those are the most successful, even authors that write at that level. So I think it's critical what you said. On top of it, just because you mentioned it, now I have to say something about, or I want to actually say something about escalation. It kind of reminds me, and I write about this in my book. I call it a corporate tantrum. And what a corporate tantrum is, in the way I described it, is that, as children, children throw all kinds of tantrums to get what they want. They want more screen time. They want more candy. I think we're all, maybe to an extent, maybe not you, Leo, but at least as a child, I've done that. Maybe not on the screen time. It's screen time because we didn't have that as frequent as it is now as a problem. But what ends up happening with children is that if you cave in, or if you give in on that tantrum, their brains get rewired, and it establishes a connection to say, this is the way I get what I want. This is the way that I can continue to have the thing, and I just have to up the ante every time. So next time my corporate tantrum, or my tantrum in that case, is going to be a little bit more extreme, and you basically taught them that this is the way that happens. And I think in the corporate world, what we end up with is a lot of adults that take the same approach because maybe they were not very successful at building relationships, because it's very challenging sometimes to build a relationship with someone to say, I have a problem with you, or maybe a problem with the behavior or a problem with the decision, whatever it is, but I'm going to talk it out with you, and we're going to figure out how to do it. And we're going to, maybe if we reach a blocking point, I'm going to bring in different ways where we can solve it, but I'm invested, invested in solving this problem with you, versus going at the first obstacle that I face because you didn't do what I want exactly. You didn't act on the request that I wanted to have. And you said, like, you need more time, or you didn't prioritize the one thing that I need. And I basically threaten via corporate tantrum that I'm basically going to go to your manager and so on. Obviously, there's cases where it's like, okay, there's somewhere in between. I'm not saying like you can generalize and say, in some cases, well, you are seeing something that requires that, but I don't think it should even be that it shouldn't be the first thing that you can think of as a way to resolve a problem via escalation. So I think that's
it can't. I mean, the number of times, and I know that, I have that family business on my background, but it doesn't mean that it was always easy. And it's a major misconception that many recruiters in HR have about these people with family business on their background. It's actually 10 times harder, because you have to overcome the stigma, in order to get ahead. And you'd be surprised. Both, when I was in corporate and multinationals, everywhere. I mean, this is just standard human nature. If mom says no, let's go to dad. And it's making me really think this whole part of this episode, this conversation, is that I feel like the principles of leadership are very similar to the principles of parenting.
To an extent,
like,
yeah.
Like you can't, like mom said, no, I'm going to go to dad. The dad needs to say, no, what did your mom say? Because leadership needs to be unified in their actions. And to overcome that is not easy when, you're having a power grab on the team, on the leadership team, because you want to get that, the behind you, supporting you. And you do that by doing favors. You know what I mean? And it's important that you don't play those games. And the leadership team needs to be more unified than anyone else in the organization.
100%. I have to agree with that. Yes.
Yeah, not easy to achieve.
Absolutely.
Especially the bigger the organization, it's harder to manage that and to agree on a code of conduct within the leadership team.
Yeah. I think that's important for sure. It kind of takes me back to like what we were also talking about, which is the understanding that there isn't necessarily, what we might get into it, but I guess my point is that there isn't necessarily this like superior wisdom that the leadership team has. Like there might be perspective, there might be insight, but I feel that the more you can empower people and bring them into such conversations, the less you create these hierarchy of elitism within companies. The less you can kind of get this divide of like the leadership team said so, as such, we need to do it. And it kind of, maybe that actually speaks to another value, which is more around people's empowerment, not authoritarian control. Because I think that's been the I don't want to say the de facto, but a common thread that you see in a lot of the corporate world. The authority speaks. It's the title of the person that gets things done. It's not their influence. It's not their true servant leadership or their values or maybe their ideas. It's person so-and-so said so, get it done now because of that. And that completely demotivates people. Because it takes empowerment out, and what I mean by empowerment is authority and control. And what I mean by that is like you give people both authority but also the responsibility on something, because you can't hold people responsible for something, but then have no authority to make decisions related to it. So that's what I meant by it.
So empowering others is kind of a tricky business, because you do have to give them that control in order to empower them. And the problem is that, do they have access to enough information about the vision, the direction, the board of directors' perspective, in order for you to empower them properly without having to micromanage everything they're doing as well? You
I
know,
guess the context falls on you as a leader. So if I think it's a good question. The side effect of a leader not sharing their vision and having their people live with that vision and understanding their strategy, I think is a negative side effect of not being able to communicate that. So is it really their responsibility to understand and gather that context if it was never communicated? But I think what some people may think of empowerment is that it's not this rogue idea of everybody does whatever you want, like do whatever you want, you're not accountable for anything, go crazy. We're an empowering culture. That for me is not authentic empowerment.
no.
Authentic empowerment is, yes, you'll be communicated what the vision is, and understand where did it come from, and you'll have the full context. You'll understand the outcomes that we're trying to achieve, but it's up to you to decide on how you achieve these outcomes. And you'll make these decisions, but you're also going to be accountable for them. And a great example comes through, like if you're using, let's say, the OKR framework, objectives and key results. If you set objectives with your teams and you hold them accountable for certain key results around an objective, and then giving them the freedom to explore on the different means or initiatives or projects to achieve such objectives, that for me is giving them both responsibility and authority. But it's not the rogue. Maybe empowerment is, because I've heard this before, especially in financial services. The word empowerment kind of has this idea that it's the wild, wild west. Everybody's gonna do whatever they want.
Gunslinging
Nobody's accountable. Exactly.
Chewing tobacco and spitting in a spittoon.
It's a little bit extreme, but yes.
Yeah, no, I'm not a fan of that kind of environment. They didn't have a lot of medicine back then, so no, thank you. Yeah, no, empowering is tricky business. I mean, you got to do it right, and like you said, I mean, you need to clearly communicate your expectations, your requirements, your everything. I mean, if you want to give someone freedom and flexibility in the way that they approach something, your expectations need to be very clearly and easily defined, and your guidelines, or let's say rail guards, need to also be clearly defined, because you don't want someone to go outside your lines, especially when it comes to ethics or legality. So yeah, empower them, sure, but you need to create the rail guard so they don't go beyond it, and clearly define it so they understand it and make sure that they understand it. But also, the objective. What's the objective? Like you said, the OKR. It needs to be what do you expect from me? What do you want from me? And it can't just be some general spewed nonsense. It has to be very specific, measurable, SMART goals. Specific, measurable, achievable. I forget the
relevant and time bound.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I agree with you. I call these creative constraints. Like before you start solving a problem or embarking on any effort, level with people. Tell them, here's the constraints that we're operating under. Here's the regulation that we can't cross. Here's the timelines that we can't miss because of whatever it is, compliance, things that we need to do. Here's the expectations from our clients. So I think leveling with people, sharing these creative constraints actually helps people come up with better ways to solve a problem. Because I don't believe, I think one of the cliche think outside the box is actually damaging in a way, because it's about thinking inside the box of constraints. So when I give you the set of constraints, it only makes you more innovative, because you have to come up with ways to solve within that. Otherwise, it's wishful thinking. It's thinking outside what is a constraint that you have creatively, and putting it that way maintains that tension.
Yeah, I mean, you have it kind of goes into this. Very closely relates to corporate governance. Companies that are switching from family to corporate governance, because from family, you know, as an entrepreneur or someone that built the business from scratch, it's very hard for you to let go of the day to day. And because you've been so involved in the day to day for 10, 20, 50 years, you know, you get to the point where building processes is not part of your nature. But when you're able to overcome that limitation and create the processes, the guidelines, the OKRs, all these things that are really required for you to be able to successfully switch to corporate governance, you normally see people really struggling to let go. You know, and then what happens is that third generation gets blamed for not successfully doing a handover. And I mean, that's part of it, but also, you know, there was I think it was by Grant something, a quote, and he said, "Good times bad times create strong people. Strong people create good times, and good times create weak people." And when I heard that, you know, it's not necessarily just about the good time, the bad time. It's also kind of about the handover. Was it done correctly in a way that someone that's a weak, you know, people can handle it and manage it properly? And I think the companies that successfully transition after the third generation to corporate governance are the ones that understand that it's not just about the generational curse. It's also has a big part to do with properly conducting a handover.
Yeah, and I wonder sometimes just on that isn't that the case with almost every generation to come, whether in life or in business, where it's like, you kids have it better than us these days. You kind of hear that
all the time.
Yeah. You don't understand the struggles that I went through, where, you know, like, you know, how many dads would say things like, you know, you don't understand how much, you know, why I studied on the lamppost outside my house, and it's like, why couldn't you study during the day? But, you know, and so the cliche kind of every generation thinks that it's better than the next one is common, whether it's in business or corporate world. But I find that that's applicable. And then to your point about letting go, it brings a lot of perils on also parenting, which you mentioned earlier. The idea of you doing something and then being able to relinquish that control and give it to someone else.
And understandably so. I mean, it's not easy. You've spent so much time emotionally involved and overcoming so many challenges that, I mean, how do you just let go one day?
Yeah, absolutely. And isn't the saying that you hear sometimes, like, this project is my baby? So people kind of make it look like it's actually their babies. That's how attached they become to a certain product or project, etc. So I think definitely true.
So you have a subtitle on your new book, and I'm curious about where that came from.
On the new book, so I'm actually writing a new book. You asking about that, or you're asking
I'm talking about product people?
Okay, so yeah, there's actually two subtitles, which makes it even longer. But A Journal of Laughter and Tears is the first one, and it was because I went back to my writings during 5 years, and I basically picked elements of it. So I kind of treated it as a journal, as if it was me journaling or reflecting in the last 5 years and putting them all in a book and reframing them and so on. And the reason why it's laughter and tears is that it brings kind of the two elements of, yes, we need to laugh at ourselves, but sometimes it's also, what is it? It's not black comedy. It's in a way a coping mechanism, right? For something that is much more soulless that you find in the corporate world, and much more extreme and maybe different than how some of our natures are. Hence the balance, hoping that yes, people can laugh, but not hoping that anybody cries, but can reflect also on the negative and the positive aspects of the world that we live in a corporate setting.
Wow. You know, that title is very poetic, almost.
Thank you.
Very creative. It shows the level of creativity that you had while writing this.
Oh, thank
I was
you.
wondering, is that the book behind you?
That is the book behind me. Yes. So
Can you pull
product.
that up to the camera? Just show that to them really quick.
Sure, sure. I mean, I can kind of pick it up here and
The link to his Amazon
yeah.
for this book is in the comments. So if anyone's interested in buying it, reading it, looking at it, breathing it, please check it out. I mean, this guy put probably, you know, anywhere between 2 to 3 years writing this book. So, and it's from literally laughter and tears. So make sure that you, you know, try to support him. Can people find the manifesto as well? Is there somewhere where we can find the manifesto?
Yeah. So I mean, Manifesto at a very high level is on our website on Prevail, prevail.website. That's actually the link. It's very easy to put up there. We plan to talk more about it as we launch our first product, which comes with its own challenges. But yeah, it's up there, and of course this session with elements of it is also available.
Yeah, and of course I'll be sure to send you a copy of this video so you can put that up on Prevail. Does anyone have any questions? I'm really curious about doing a head count here. How many can people just write where you're watching live from and you know, your favorite part of the discussion so far in the comment section? I love to see where people are watching from, and I would appreciate that. So, Elsawy, what else would you say is the key highlights in the manifesto?
Yeah, I mean, we spoke about courageous vulnerability, not pretentious excellence. We kind of touched on the humble.
Sorry, we have. Sorry to interrupt. This has been sitting there for a while, and I thought it was a great compliment to you.
Oh,
so it's amazing what you mentioned about simple vocabulary. As most of us are trying to show off with our own dictionaries, a very, very inspiring speaker. He is indeed. He has actually won awards for his keynote speaking.
You guys are making me. This is one of the areas where I get challenged by. I don't know if your audience would maybe benefit from this, but you touch on an important allergy that I kind of mentioned about being humble. And I think like just having praise like this makes it very challenging. So I actually developed ways on humbling myself. And it depends, of course, on the context and the culture you go in. But maybe I'll quickly share 3 tips that I found useful. One is a little bit extreme depending on where you're at. But I think remembering death in general helps. Remembering that you're not going to be here forever. And whether you can participate in ceremonies around that, I think changes your perspective completely on things. The other one that I get the weird looks about that I do when I get praise like this, and thank you, but now I have to invest in that a little bit, is I know some people might think this is weird, but cleaning public washrooms. That works. You don't need to do it in like, you know,
like an official manner.
Think about it exactly, but we have personally, I have a local Second Cup, which is a chain around, and whenever I feel too much of myself, that's my own exercise to kind of bring you down to this humbleness and that level to really break that ego. Because if you don't tame that ego, it's just natural within all of us.
Well, taming that ego is actually another principle, isn't it?
Yes. So yes. So that I think is very important. That just taming your ego and going back to the humble souls, not egocentric narcissist as a principle. But these tips kind of go hand in hand because it might not come naturally to people on what do I need to do to do this. So I think it's very, very important to keep it in check. But anyways, I digress. So that was another comment related to it. I think we covered a lot of the manifesto, and I'm just looking at the time. I think the only one that we kind of maybe I kind of wanted to talk about a little bit was
I'm hoping it's the one I think it is.
Well, why don't you go with the one you think it is? Because I want to make.
I honestly want to talk about shared accountability and possessive control.
Okay, great.
Was that it?
Well, I was debating between that one and the other one around human impact, not short-sighted profits. But I think they're equally valuable. So shared accountability. Yeah.
We can go over a little bit if need be, but let's talk about shared accountability, because I have very strong opinions about shared accountability.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, again, it paints a picture of extreme here where we can, and I think there is a clear, or maybe not very clear, difference between accountability and responsibility. I think responsibility comes from within. I can be responsible for something and I can take responsibility, but that comes from the individual, versus accountability is usually something that you hold people to, right? You say, I'm holding you accountable to something. So there's that slight difference, although I hear it being interchangeable. A lot of people say, I'm accountable, I'm responsible, etc. And, I don't want to get into a racy chart and describe like what the difference between them is. But at a very high level, I think what this principle is trying to convey is that we're all in this together. And the idea of sharing the accountability when something on an effort that we're doing is very important, versus the other extreme is being able to have all the control in the world and being possessive around it. And I think that also speaks to the maturity of the leader that you're dealing with, because possessive control on people, on actions, on decisions doesn't scale. It really doesn't scale. Even if you're thinking about you as a leader, there's lots of sayings that we can have around this, but the idea that you want to be everywhere, solve every problem, make every decision, and be in control the whole time simply doesn't scale. So investing in people's thinking, although you'd hear people say sometimes it's a waste of time, I don't want to invest in making people better, is the only way, in my mind, that you can scale up an organization. If you don't scale the thinking, then there is no hope for you to make better decisions and build better products and design better services or achieve anything worthwhile, because you didn't give people a way to fish. You're just focused on what is the saying? Like give them a fish, they'll have lunch for one day, or teaching them how to fish, they can eat for a lifetime. So I'm always baffled by how little some corporations invest in making people better thinkers and makers, because they're not investing on the long term. So that I think is very challenging. And that's what this principle is really about.
What do you think if someone is constantly being singled out and being asked to hold himself accountable? Like, what would that do to that person? If it's just that person.
If it's just that person. So I guess the context would matter. So I guess they're being told by others that they need to be held accountable.
Well, yeah, I mean, so there's situations where, someone becomes the scapegoat to almost every problem, whether they're involved or not. So I can imagine that can result, in a situation where that person will eventually walk away.
Yeah, I think it's I mean, maybe what's not mentioned there is that shared accountability needs to come from needs to be authentic as well. So I can't hold someone accountable if they had nothing to do. It's like putting blame now rather than accountability on someone that had no control, which goes back to empowerment, and perhaps no autonomy to make certain decisions. And that's where you end up in the situation. Or depending on the context, maybe that's another way for people to say, I don't trust the outcomes that you're in. I don't trust. So it might be a coverted way for them to describe that they don't trust this person. But of course, it's got to be authentic. It's got to be authentic. If you're going to hold someone accountable, then you have to give them that authority. You mentioned the word scapegoat. So I would definitely not support a situation like that, because it's just deflecting responsibility, if anything.
Well, you know, every situation that I've ever faced as HR, I've had, you know, especially when you're talking about like dealing with conflict resolution, is that what I normally find is that it's never just one person that's accountable. It's never in every single situation. I've never seen one situation where it's just one person who's at fault.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think people tend to blame for the end result, and that's it, rather than blaming for the things that led, the root problems that led to the result.
Yeah, I think it's also a matter of perspective of what do you want to do after, right? Because I mean, there's a saying that you hear sometimes in the corporate world around like, whose neck is it going to be that I'm going to choke if something goes wrong? Which I think is a very damaging,
Oh my God, I hate that.
very damaging. And I mean, people talk about it in a kind of not non-literal sense, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But I think language and the words that we use, going back to vocabulary, really affects how we think about things, and those elements have some truth to it. So is the goal to blame, or is the goal to improve? And I think depending on the perspective, it changes everything.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
I mean, what I like about accountability for the purpose of improvement and forward move, momentum, is that kind of attitude would actually encourage people to be more honest and transparent. Because right now, I mean, you see a lot of companies where people are hiding their mistakes, and they're not necessarily getting resolved. So what's happening is you're burying a mountain's worth of problems under the rug, and it's creating an obvious sore image to the public.
Yeah. And maybe because they were not courageous to vulnerably admit, which goes back to where we started. I messed up on this thing, or I didn't consider this thing, and I want to make it better. I want to solve this problem, and so on. Maybe the space that was there for them was not a safe space for them to own up to it. So exactly what you say happens. I'm going to hide it from people. I'm going to pretend to be excellent. So pretentious excellence is what happens, and reality.
Wow,
all of that, right? So we went full circle, I guess.
you just kind of threw a curveball there. I wasn't expecting you to go in that direction. Nice. All right. Do you have more time? Are you in a hurry?
I have another 8 minutes, but I have to be out at 2:10 my local time, so 8 minutes, 10 after the hour.
Well, let's try to cover that last principle you wanted to talk about.
Sure. So we were talking about human impact, not short-sighted profits. I think this is a very, very not just challenging one to have, but I think short-termism in general is a common syndrome you see in a lot of companies, whether corporate or not. But it's the idea of chasing the quarter. I want to get results for this quarter, and as a result, I take a lot of shortcuts. I incur a lot of technical debt, design debt, experience debt, all kinds of, at least in the world of product. Why? Because that's what I get rewarded on. I get rewarded on these short-term results, right? It's very immediate and reactive, and as a result, if you don't get this perspective around what are the longer-term goals that you have, or the human impact that you can create, gets lost. So I think that the goal of this principle is to say it's human impact first. The side effect of course, bringing in the profits is key, because that's what you need to survive. I'm not downgrading that, or I'm not saying like, just solve the problem at whatever cost and forget about your bottom line. Absolutely not. But I'm trying to say, in terms of priorities, what should you focus on first? Because if you focus on short-sighted profits, you're going to make a lot of subpar decisions, because you never actually focused on the need. who are you solving this problem for? What kind of impact are you going to make on the humans, whether they're customers that you have or employees that you have? So it takes you to a completely different direction that on the long run, it becomes counterintuitive. Although a lot of people that practice this short-termism think that they're really achieving their goals. But it's a bit of that hamster wheel effect.
Wow.
Like, I just want to run, I want to survive this quarter, and I want to deliver on the results. I can't think of a human impact, but it harms you in the long run. So that's what this is about.
Wow. I mean, while you were talking, I both saw it from a leader's perspective and an employee perspective at the same time, and it blew my mind. I'm not gonna lie. You know, when you think about an employee that's being pressured to get short-term results when their role is more strategic, I can imagine the amount of pressure and frustration from both the leader perspective and the employee perspective. But as you said, it goes back to setting expectations and OKRs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, why would you hire someone in a strategic role if you expect short-term results?
100%. And I think it does so much damage on motivation when it comes to employees, because if you're not, you wake up in the morning, there's always the question of what wakes you up in the morning, but what keeps you up at night. And it's typically for purpose-driven people that want to work on a meaningful mission or have a meaningful impact on the world, changing the world to become a better place. I know it sounds rosy
and idealistic, but I mean, I'm one of those people. I mean, of course, after 3 years of trying, my expectations have been lowered significantly.
But I think that there is that aspect of, like, how do you motivate people if they don't see the long-term human impact, and if you're simply asking them to report on the numbers and chase the numbers without understanding the impact they make in the world, especially if they're meaning-driven and they're purpose-driven. So it does a big difference on the culture that you create.
Excellent. I know you got to go, so I'm going to wrap this up really quick. I really appreciate your time. Everyone, ladies and gentlemen, if you're still live with us, Elsawy Yehia, this is one of the, in my opinion, amazing chief product officers from around the world. And he is a global kind of citizen as well. And, don't forget Amazon Product People, check it out. You can read the summary and decide whether you want to buy it or download it or whatever, but definitely worth checking out at least.
Thank you for having me, Leo, and thanks for the plug around the book, and thanks for the very meaningful conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. So every single time we have a chat, I feel like there's someone out there that understands me and gets me as well. So thank you.
I hope I continue to be that person, and happy to have more chats in the future.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for attending. We'll see you on the next episode.
All right. Thank you.